The three of us will be discussing leadership, the pandemic, technology, through an intergenerational lens. And don't forget for our audience members that you can ask questions. So we will await your questions. You can ask them right away if you'd like, and I'll be receiving them throughout the discussion. You can just leave those questions in the chat box for our honorees. Add your province at the beginning of the question or your territory so we know where you're writing from. And I have many questions for each of you, and so I'll start with a few of my own. And Elyse, of course, I'm always curious about questions of leadership, and you described your leadership style as flexible. And what do you mean by that, and how has it worked for you?
Thanks, Julie, for the question. It's a great question. I just have found through the years that, you know, at different times and in different situations, you need to be a different type of leader if you can. And I think developing those different aspects of your leadership style is really important so that you can call on them. Sometimes you need to be very strategic. In the early days of GE, we had to put a game plan together. You need to have vision and motivate the group towards the vision. Other times, maybe we're restructuring and we have to be very focused. We have to be compassionate, but focused, and be very performance driven. So you need to call on, I believe, different attributes and different styles, depending on where you need to take the team and what the situation and the environment requires. So hence I've learned to have a bit of a toolbox of leadership styles to call upon as the situation requires. But the underpinnings, the values stay the same.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Elyse. And Shingai, when we asked you the same question, the first word that came to your mind was honest. And you know, the word honest to me links right into authenticity, which I think is such a powerful word as well in terms of leadership. And I wondered if you could just reflect a bit about honest leadership and the role that that's played in your career.
So the words honest and driven immediately came to mind because it's not a choice sometimes to lead. Sometimes the situation presents itself and you happen to be at the right place at the right time, and it's your duty to speak up and to speak your truth and to represent sometimes groups that can't be represented, or to be unpopular in a moment. But the most important thing ends up being that truth, because that's what we need to move typically an organization forward or a cause forward. So that's really where I was coming from with that. Is it's sometimes not a choice. It's just, if you have a truth, then you must tell it.
Excellent. I love that. So to no surprise, I'm curious to speak to both of you about, you know, both of your careers have been centered around the values of science, of technology, of data. These have played integral roles in your success, in your careers, in your leadership. I started out my career working in a faculty of engineering, and 5 years later, we're still fighting for the same numbers within, you know, programs like computer science and engineering. You know, there's been all sorts of initiatives. There's been financing, there's been funding, there's been initiatives and programs, really exemplary work, encouraging more women to go into science and engineering. And unfortunately, the statistics are pretty flat. And I'd love for you to talk about what attracted you to that field and some observations that you might have regarding the role of women in those fields. And maybe I'll start with you, Shingai.
Sure. So my first degree was actually a business degree, and I stumbled into tech because it just happened, a series of coincidences, or I'm a person of faith, so that's what I attribute it to. But just happened that the first job that I started was an analytics company, and we were analyzing point of sale data on behalf of retailers and manufacturers. So, you know, Colgate, Johnson & Johnson, Walmart, those were my clients. And through that process, I just, at some point it became, I had to keep asking someone to give me data sets, right? And I'd have to keep going back to them and say, can you give me another extraction? And it just became expedient for everyone to teach me some SQL. So that was the genesis of it. There wasn't a big, hoo-ha, now I'm a woman and now I'm going to go into tech and now I'm going to learn coding. It was just part of my job, and I had to learn how to do it as part of my job. And then subsequently, I decided to formalize the skill set by doing a master's degree in it. And that formalization is important to some, but it was important for me because the field of analytics and data science was also fairly new. So I just really wanted something that I could point to, a piece of paper, to say that I have real skills, this is a real thing, and I know how to do it. And then in terms of the role of women in my master's program class, it was 25% female. So still, we weren't quite there yet with the 50-50. But it's definitely growing. And I think part of the responsibility that I feel is that even on a day that I don't want to give a talk, that I should get on the stage and give it my best, because I don't know who's listening and who might see, oh gosh, there's someone who looks like me, or there's a fellow woman who's in these circles, who's working in artificial intelligence. It's something that is then accessible to that person.
That's great. Thank you, Shingai. And for you, Elyse?
Well, I've always had an interest in science. I started out really early as a pre-med. I didn't go that route, but I kind of love science, and I love the scientific way of thinking about things, which led me to kind of the intersection actually of science and business. And it really wasn't, I didn't know a lot about technology per se and widgets and gadgets and everything else other than what I saw in Star Trek growing up, which I loved. But then I did go to GE, and I had, the majority of my career at General Electric, and I fell in love, quite honestly, with the art, the design, the creativity of engineers and what they could create. And it seemed to me something that so many people didn't appreciate. We take for granted that to turn the lights on, what actually happens all behind the scenes to make that happen, the incredible equipment, the brilliance of mankind, in engineering, of creating things. And so I really did fall in love with it, though I don't pretend to necessarily be very good at it, but I am a great lover and most appreciative. And through GE, I certainly worked very hard because we wanted more women engineers. We needed more engineers, and therefore needed to make sure we were reaching into the full population. So as a company, we were very supportive, both globally, but also our work in Canada to support women in engineering school girls getting interested in science at early ages. There were so many different ways that we could try and influence and encourage girls to get exposed to it. Because oftentimes once exposed, they shared that love and interest in technology, but they didn't have access to where to pursue it or how to pursue it. Once in work, we also learned that there were a lot of programs that we could have for career women in technical fields that could actually help them, but we needed to focus on that. You can't just take it for granted, because in some cases, there weren't many women in a situation, so they might be uncomfortable, or you needed to make sure that that was a attractive work environment. In other cases, you needed to help them with ongoing education. But the point was that if we wanted more women in STEM, it did take proactive effort to either to build sort of the pipeline from an early age. And certainly I was really pleased as a leader in a company that supported that effort. We were able to accomplish a lot. And now so many groups are focused on it. And then I see people like Shingai, and it's so impressive because the world of technology and digital technology is one too that needs to ensure that it's attracting and keeping and creating great careers for women.
That's great. I do have some more questions, but I have a question that's just come in here that's appropriate at this moment, Elyse, as you're speaking. It's from Rhonda Barnett, who is in Ontario. And she was asking about one piece of advice to the next generation of trailblazers who are carrying this torch in terms of women in manufacturing.
Thank you, Rhonda, for that question, and hello, by the way. Rhonda's a great example herself of women who are trailblazers in technology, being a leader in manufacturing in Canada. So I'm delighted to have the question. And my one piece of advice would be really to persist and don't give up, that when you feel that something is discouraging you from the path that you wanted to take, to reach out and ask for help, to talk to a young leader like Shingai about what helped her, if it's in the technology field, or an old leader like me, or some trailblazer like Rhonda, but or in your company, to go to your manager, go to a mentor. So many women sometimes get off track without really having the conversation, and the company or the manager or someone could have stepped up and actually gotten rid of the barrier or helped eliminate the issue that perhaps was causing them to get discouraged or to want to change directions because of attributes of the workplace or the job itself. So I think it's really just don't give up, ask, get help, get good advice, and make sure you're really pulling in the support that's there to help you and taking advantage of it.
Excellent. So PPF, of course, over the past 7 months has been doing a lot of work focused on rebuilding Canada's economy. We're living through this pandemic and it's difficult times globally. And there's been a lot of talk about building back better, and frankly, a huge opportunity for innovation and for doing things differently. And without wanting to put you on the spot too much, I'd love to hear some thoughts about what Canada could frankly be doing differently as we move forward, and how we could perhaps, what one issue would you like to see kind of reinvented? And Shingai, I'll start with you.
So I work in technical education, so that's where I'm going to go. I'm very passionate about the upskilling of current workforces because I think the opportunities are in digital. So some folks have been able to, get right to it in this pandemic, but there are also folks that are not participating. And if you've got an organization that's got, varying degrees of skill sets, so we call it a technical proficiency pyramid, right? So at the base of your pyramid, if you've got folks that, maybe just dabble in reporting or data capturing in various functions in your organization, I would say upskilling those people so they can start to leverage the data in the organization will help us find opportunities we hadn't seen before. There are patterns in the data that if we look at and we leverage, we can start to develop products that we hadn't considered before at a time that the world is more digital. So there's a big opportunity there. And I know many leaders, obviously the banks, TD Bank is a big proponent of this. Many organizations are already trying to leverage data, but this is definitely an opportunity for Canada that we should start looking at now in particular.
Good. Elyse, I'll go over to you with the same question.
Yes, well, maybe I'll answer it a little differently in the sense of rather than one particular area, I think it's the way we approach policy, in that I think in a world that is becoming so complex and so spontaneous in terms of things that are happening, I think we have to have policy that is more and more resilient and build resilience and flexibility into what we do and how we do it. And so I think the question really becomes, how do we move from sort of prescriptive to outcome-based public policy? I know that there are efforts to drive that, and I think continuing to move in that direction so that we allow, whether it's business, nonprofits, but effectively we allow our society the flexibility to do what is right within policy frameworks, but not become over prescriptive on how it is done. Use the talent and the capabilities of the people to actually solve the problem, but create the right frameworks. And a great example, I think, is in the areas of innovation. And I think there's been great progress, in part led by your chair, Elyse, who was on the Growth Council of the government, but focusing on innovation and how do we, as a government, create policies that allow for innovation to happen, allow for that risk of sometimes failing, that is okay. And right now we have a risk orientation that prevents us from sometimes creating policy that actually does allow for error, but it also allows and encourages innovation and new ways of thinking, which I think is going to be so critical to a country like Canada as we go forward in what is a very unpredictable world.
In our talk before this evening, Elyse, we spoke about a federal policy that you thought had been very successful, and you referred to immigration. And I wondered if you could talk a bit about that and why that was the first that came to mind for you, why that mattered.
Yes, thanks. I do, I over the past couple of years have become a bit more informed about Canada's history around immigration, and also seen through the Growth Council how important it is to the growth of our society. So I am very supportive, and I think Canada has benefited in many ways in a very open and inviting immigration policy. And I think as we are continuing to grow, and you talk about what does Canada look like sort of going forward, I think we continue to need a large population. The fact of the matter is you just need a growing population for growth in the country, for your GDP growth. But also we benefit from all the talents, all the culture, all the perspectives that come with that policy. And I do think our focus on increasing our economic immigrant so that it helps bring in the type of technology capabilities and other skills that we need to grow our society is also. So I think there's been very good progress around immigration policy in recent years. We're still a compassionate society, but we also appreciate that immigration is critical to the growth and prosperity of Canadians as a nation.
Thank you for that, Elyse. Perhaps I'd ask the same question to you, Shingai, if you could comment on something that you really feel Canada is doing right.
So, Elyse, you've taken two things. The one is Star Trek. I'm a huge fan.
Yes.
And also on the subject of immigration. That's my story, right? That's how I ended up in Canada. And actually that story started many years ago when I was in high school, when my sister came to Canada first as a university student to Dalhousie. And even at that point, I had, somewhere in my mind that I might come to Canada one day. And, I considered coming for school, and then that, it didn't work out. But then at some point, the decision to move to Canada, we made it. And it was a seamless experience that was fair. And I think that's a very important thing to mention in that putting in an application and then just following the correct steps and doing the right things, you can actually end up with a good outcome. So I really respect the system. I think the system works. Of course, all systems could improve, but I have to agree with you, Elyse. Immigration is really Canada's one of the best policies in the world.
So of course, this evening we're going to be hearing from Senator Murray Sinclair, who chaired the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and who's been such a thoughtful and inspiring leader to all of us for so long. And we heard from Claudette earlier this evening as well. And I know that both of you have touched on issues of reconciliation within your careers. And I know that it's something that matters to you. And I wondered if each of you would share some of your thoughts on where Canada is, where Canada needs to be. Of course, if we've been watching the news after the last couple of weeks, there's there's been some horrific things that have happened both in Nova Scotia and within Quebec. At least I know you're out of the country, and so I don't know how closely you're following those situations in Canada, but there's been some very, very difficult situations with Indigenous people in those two areas. Maybe Shingai, I'll start with you. If you could talk a bit about the process of reconciliation in Canada.
I spent almost 10 years in South Africa, so I do have a lens by which to maybe approach this topic. And the first thing I'll say is that it is a complex topic, right? So you have families, generations that have been affected by different policies. And in the South African context, it was just visibly in terms of skin color. And in Canada, it's a little bit more complex in terms of the policies that affected the Indigenous communities. So right off the bat, let's accept that this is not an easy thing to tackle. We won't roll out of bed and just get this right the first time. What I will say is that the commitment for change, the commitment to acknowledge the things that were done that were not fair, the things that were not just, the commitment to tackle the issues head on, to not be afraid, to just acknowledge our discomfort and know that this is a process that needs to take place. Those are the things that we need to lean into. And it's not going to happen overnight. And there is a process of forgiveness that will take place. And sometimes we want it to happen immediately, but it may not. And that patience and that approach of being willing to listen and to understand is really what we need to do to resolve these issues. And at the end of the day, I would say seeing each other as human beings. In all the news articles that you alluded to, Julie, the thing that sticks out for me is when we stop seeing each other as people. That's when certain words are used, certain descriptions and certain attitudes come out. And if we see each other as individuals, as human beings, and see the light in one another, I firmly believe that we can do this. I firmly believe that Canada can get to a place where everyone feels included and everybody can participate.
Thank you. And Elyse, over to you.
Shanghai just spoke so eloquently about that. I'm not sure I can add much to what you just said. It was beautifully said. I will comment one other learning that I've had also as an immigrant to Canada. It was not a history that I knew or understood well. And recently, in joining an agency board, I was asked, and I took several months of education around the history of Indigenous, done and delivered by Indigenous community. And I just learned enough. I learned so much that I just hadn't picked up in other ways. And it gave me just that much greater appreciation and greater understanding of how much I don't know, how much I need to listen, and how much more there still is to learn. And I just really encourage everyone to sort of explore their own understanding. I think it would be very helpful to the country if people had more background and shared in the perspective that our Indigenous population has. And I just would say that I thought Shingai spoke very eloquently to the point.
Excellent. Thank you so much to each of you. And we do have some time for a few more audience questions if there are some that want to be sent into the chat box. But I have many, of course. And so one of them is around getting back to the pandemic. Of course, I don't know what percentage of the population, but a great deal of the Canadian population is still, when possible, many people are still working from home. And I'm wondering if you could talk a bit about the future of work and how that might change. Will people go back to the office in the same way? Will we have in-person meetings in the same way as we had done before? How is this disruption that we're seeing right now? Can you look with your crystal ball into the future, and how do you see this changing the way that we interact, the way that we work together, the way that cities are what does this mean for the future of working, of being? And maybe I'll start with you, Elyse.
Sure. Well, I'm in an area that's near a university, and so remote, and so I've been doing a lot with the students here, but at the same time also, a foot in the business world as well. And I would say that I think work will be different, but I think we've also come to appreciate being with people, and that seeing people over Zoom, a virtual dinner, and I know you guys did a fantastic job pulling together tonight, but I'm sure that most of the people tuning in would love to be at dinner, even if it is in Toronto, and enjoying rubbing elbows in the company of one another and the spontaneity that comes with that. And I think that's true in classroom settings and in office settings. I also hear from a lot of students or young people starting work, the challenges of trying to get to know the culture of a company. You're just starting a new job, or you've just changed jobs, or maybe you're just promoted. And you have to meet people, you want to get to know them, you want to understand the culture of a company. And that's just a very hard thing to do, even in a Zoom chat room. And so I do think that there will be people who are keen to get back into the office. They want to know that the office is safe and that their way to get there is safe. My sense is that some of the collaborative approaches that we've taken will probably change slightly so that they're flexible. So that if something like this, God forbid, were to happen again or last longer, we can accommodate within the office environment safety for everyone. But I think that we'll find that people are keen to get back together. That said, I think we also learned that we don't have to travel to be at every meeting, that we can accomplish a lot more using these new technologies than we maybe appreciated before, and that people can work remotely or have more flexible schedules, which of course will help a lot of young families and people with elders at home, that, you know, there are different ways to work, and hopefully people will be more open-minded to embracing those ways going forward. But I think people will look forward to getting back to work and to the culture of the company.
Thank you, Elyse. And Shingai, what about you? How do you see the future of work for yourself?
Yeah, my crystal ball says that in the future of work, we will learn better ways to interface with the technology. So right now we have to type into keyboards or, you know, into phones, and that really is a limitation in terms of the speed and intensity that we might want to interact with each other and with these devices. So I think we're going to get smarter about how we input and interface with the technology. I also predict that we will not see as many people going back to the office. I think this has been a wake-up call for all of us in terms of our priorities with our families, and you know, at different generations. So with their kids in the home, the elderly, and even for ourselves in terms of our health. So there's been a shift there. So we may see folks moving out of the big cities for more comfortable living if they have the option of working remotely. And I also think we will see a greater focus on important issues like mental health. That you know, this has really shone a light on it, in that, you know, some of us were in the rat race going. That wasn't particularly healthy. And then when this situation slowed us all down, we really got an opportunity to look at our lives. So I appreciate the new focus on mental health issues, and I think that's going to be an important issue going forward. In terms of education, I do think that piece is not yet fully figured out, and this generation of students, folks that are currently in school right now, we are going to be writing PhDs about this in the next 20 or 40 years in terms of what the impact was of this time period. So for that one, I'm going to say we'll see. We don't know yet what that might end up looking like.
Excellent. Thank you, Shingai. That unfortunately wraps up our discussion today. And I just want to thank each of you. In terms of commonalities, you are both leaders with courage, with authenticity, and with enormous focus. And I'm just delighted to know both of you, and PPF is delighted to honor you this evening. I think both of you have your awards with you. Can you show us your awards? Do you have it there? Yay! And so there's your awards. We're so proud to have you as part of our PPF family, and thank you so much for your commitment to public policy, for your commitment to Canada, and for being with us this evening. We're just simply delighted. Thank you so much.